I was trudging along the winding trail of Umpqua National Forest when a silence hit me, sharp, heavy, like the world had stopped breathing. The leaves hung still, their usual rustle swallowed by an eerie hush. And then it happened. A shadow sliced through the sky, a small bird dropping like a stone, lifeless, crashing at my feet with a dull thud. My heart kicked hard, racing as I knelt, its tiny body cold in my hands, its eyes white and opaque, glinting like marbles lost in the dark. I looked up, instinct clawing at me, and froze. Above, the clouds churned against the wind, swirling into slow, deliberate spirals, their gray coils staring back like eyes. I'm Ethan 40, a park ranger who's called this Oregon wilderness home for years, a place where the towering firs and rushing rivers once felt like a sanctuary. Birds have been my life, watching them dart through the canopy, their songs a thread tying me to this forest. But lately, that love's turned sour, twisted by a mystery I can't shake. Dead birds, dozens of them, scattered across the trails, all with those same milky eyes, a sight that's haunted my every step. The air was thick that day, heavy with a damp chill that seeped through my ranger jacket, and I'd been on patrol since dawn, my boots crunching over pine needles and moss. I'd tried to shrug off the unease, chalk it up to a rough week, but the signs were piling up, too many to ignore. Each morning, pulling on my uniform, I'd feel it, a weight on my chest, a dread I couldn't name, growing sharper with every lifeless sparrow I found. Reports had been trickling in from other rangers, wildlife acting strange, deer stumbling, like they'd forgotten how to walk, odd noises echoing through the trees at night, a low hum that rattled your bones. The forest, once alive with chatter and motion, felt choked now, its vibrancy fading under a shadow I couldn't see. I'd pushed on, stubborn, telling myself it was my job to figure this out, to protect what I loved. But this was different. The silence pressed in, electric, buzzing under my skin, and as I stood over that bird, the clouds shifted above, their spirals tightening, deliberate, like they were tracking me. I stumbled into a clearing, the trees parting like curtains, and stopped cold. A circle of feathers lay scattered on the ground, soft and gray, each one a grim marker of death glowing faintly in the dim light. My breath hitched, sharp and shallow, as I crouched, my fingers tracing the circle's edge. It wasn't random, wasn't natural. The feathers curved too perfect, too intentional, like a ritual carved into the earth. A shiver crawled up my spine, cold, despite the sweat beading on my forehead, and I couldn't shake the thought something was wrong here, something bigger than a disease or a predator. The forest felt alive in a way it shouldn't, watching, waiting, its stillness a mask for whatever lurked beneath. I'd grown up on stories, old tales my grandpa spun about spirits in the woods, vengeful shadows born from human greed, but I'd laughed them off, filed them away with childhood fears. Now, kneeling in that clearing, those whispers felt too real, too close. A gust whipped through the trees, sudden and sharp, rattling the branches and sending a chill down my neck. I stood, heart pounding, and looked up. The clouds twisted tighter, their spirals locking onto me, a silent invitation, a warning, maybe a threat. My stomach churned, a mix of dread and certainty. I wasn't alone out here, not anymore. The weight of it hit me. Every rustle, every snap carried a promise of something dark, something I couldn't outrun. I'd spent years mapping these trails, knowing every ridge and hollow. But now the forest was a stranger, its familiar paths turning alien under my boots. The bird at my feet stared up, its white eyes glinting, and I felt it, a presence hovering just out of sight. I'd always been the guy who fixed things, bandaged injured hikers, tracked lost deer. But this was beyond me, a puzzle I couldn't solve with a map or a radio. The feathers glowed faintly, a ghostly shimmer, and I wondered, what was up there in those clouds? What had turned my sanctuary into a graveyard, and why did it feel like it knew me? Days had blurred into weeks since the first bird fell. each one a little heavier, a little stranger, but today cut deeper. The air buzzed, alive with a tension I couldn't name, and as I lingered in that clearing, the forest seemed to lean in, its silence a shroud tightening around me. I had to know, had to find the truth, even if it broke me. The wind picked up again, colder now, slicing through my jacket, and I glanced at the sky. The spirals pulsed, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat in the clouds. My hands shook as I brushed the feathers, their softness a cruel contrast to the dread pooling in my gut. Something was out there, watching, and I couldn't turn back. Twilight crept in, casting long, jagged shadows through the trees, and the silence deepened, wrapping me in a fog of unease. I started back toward the station, my mind racing, but the trail twisted underfoot, bending in ways it shouldn't, leading me deeper instead of out. The forest was shifting, and I was caught in its grip. Night fell hard, the last light bleeding away, and that's when it happened. Something inexplicable broke the stillness, a crack in the dark that changed everything. The air hummed, alive and electric, and I knew I wasn't just a ranger anymore. I was prey, hunted by a mystery I'd only begun to touch. I hurried along the trail, my boots slipping on the damp earth as night swallowed the forest, the silence so thick it pressed against my ears like a physical weight. The station was my goal, a beacon of safety. But the path twisted under me, familiar turns warping into a maze I didn't recognize. The trees leaning closer, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. A laugh broke through, bright, sharp, jarring against the tension, and I spun, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark to find Mia and Jake stepping out of the underbrush. Mia's red hair glowed like a flame in the gloom, her fierce grin a lifeline. Jake trailed behind, his broad frame tense, his skeptical squint softening the edge of his usual bravado. "Ethan, you look like you've seen a ghost," Mia said, her voice teasing but tight, her eyes flicking to the trees, betraying the unease she tried to hide. She'd been my rock out here, the one who'd dive into any mess with me, but tonight, even her fire seemed dimmed by the forest's shadow. "Might as well have," I said, my voice trembling, rough from the strain clawing at my throat. "You won't believe what I found. Something's wrong out there. Something big." My hands shook as I gestured back toward the clearing, the bird's white eyes flashing in my mind. Jake rolled his eyes, crossing his arms over his chest, his ranger cap tilted back. "Another dead bird? We've been picking those up all week, probably just some bug going around killing them off." His tone was dry, dismissive, the practical guy who'd rather log a report than chase shadows. "It's not just that," I snapped, urgency spiking my voice, cutting through his doubt. "The clouds, they're moving wrong, swirling like they're alive. And there's a clearing, a circle of feathers too perfect like a ritual. It's not natural, Jake, I swear it." My breath hitched, the weight of it spilling out. Mia's grin faded, her brow furrowing as she stepped closer, her flashlight beam joining mine. "Ethan, we need to take this seriously," she said, her voice low, steady despite the flicker of worry in her green eyes. "If something's hitting the wildlife this hard, it's bigger than a disease. It could unravel everything here." Jake huffed, shifting his weight, his skepticism a wall I couldn't break. "We can't go off the deep end over some weird weather in a pile of feathers," he said, his voice flat. But I caught the unease in how he glanced at the sky. "Let's check it out, sure, but keep it real. Credibility matters out here." I clenched my fists, frustration boiling under my skin. "You don't get it. It's not just birds dying. There's something in the air, something watching us. I felt it, Jake. Those clouds, they're not right." My voice cracked raw with a fear I couldn't bury, a certainty I couldn't explain. Mia put a hand on my arm, her touch firm, grounding. "Ethan, let's go see that clearing. Together," she said, her tone resolute, cutting through the tension. "If there's something off, we'll face it as a team. We owe it to this place, to the animals, to ourselves." Her eyes held, mind fierce and unwavering. Jake sighed, reluctant but nodded, his jaw tight. "Fine, but If this is just you spooking yourself, I'm not chasing fairy tales all night, he said, his voice gruff. But he fell in step as we turned back, the three of us a shaky line against the dark. I could feel his doubt, a wedge between us, but I didn't care. I needed them with me. The forest loomed as we retraced my path, the trees taller, darker, their shadows stretching long and jagged across the trail. Each step felt heavier, the air thick with a tension that buzzed under my skin, the silence pressing in like a warning. Turn back, it said, but I couldn't, not now. We hit the clearing, and the stillness hit harder, a wall of quiet that swallowed our breaths. What the hell is this? Jake muttered, his voice low, his skepticism cracking as he stared at the circle of feathers, their gray shimmer stark against the dirt, too perfect, too wrong. I knelt beside it, my heart pounding, my fingers hovering over the feathers. This wasn't random, I said, my voice rough, barely above a whisper. It's a message. Something's here, and it's not done. The forest watched, its eyes in the clouds, and I knew this was just the beginning. The clearing stretched before us, the feathers glowing faintly under the beam of my flashlight, their delicate curves a stark contrast to the dread knotting my gut. Mia crouched beside me, her red hair catching the light, her fingers brushing the edge of the circle, her breath fogging in the chill. This isn't natural, she said, her voice low, tight with unease. Jake paced the perimeter, his boots scuffing the dirt, his flashlight beam darting over the trees like he could scare off whatever lurked there. Okay, it's weird, I'll give you that, he said, his tone grudging, his skepticism bending under the weight of what we saw. But a ritual? Come on, Ethan, let's not lose our heads. I stood, my knees creaking, my heart hammering against my ribs. Lose our heads? I snapped, my voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. Look at it, Jake. Those clouds, the birds, this. It's not some fluke. Something's watching us. Something alive. My hand shook, pointing at the sky, the spirals still twisting slow and deliberate. Mia's eyes flicked up, narrowing as she tracked the clouds, her jaw tightening. He's right. It's too coordinated, she said, standing, her flashlight. Beam joining mine, casting long shadows that danced across the clearing. The ecosystem's shifting, and this feels intentional. We can't ignore it. A rustle broke the stillness, sharp and sudden, and we froze, our beam snapping toward the trees. The shadows shifted, a flicker of motion darting through. The underbrush, too fast to catch, too real to dismiss. My breath caught, a chill crawling up my spine. Something was out there, and it wasn't just the wind. Did you see that? I asked, my voice low, barely a whisper, my pulse thudding in my ears. Mia nodded, her face paling, her grip tightening on her flashlight. Yeah, something moved, she said, her voice steady but edged with fear, her eyes locked on the dark. Jake swung his beam around, his skepticism cracking further, his voice dropping. All right, maybe there's something, animal, whatever, he said, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him, his usual bravado faltering. Doesn't mean it's what you're thinking, Ethan. Before I could argue, a figure stepped from the shadows, a woman, tall and lean, her dark robes flowing like liquid night, her hair wild and tangled, spilling over her shoulders. Her eyes glinted, sharp and deep, like stones polished by a river, and my stomach dropped, a mix of dread and awe pinning me in place. I've been waiting, she said, her voice smooth, resonant, cutting through the air like a blade, laced, with an eerie calm that made my skin prickle. You've felt it, haven't you, Ethan? The imbalance, the warning, the forest speaks, and you must listen. Her gaze locked on me, piercing, unyielding. Jake stumbled back, his flashlight shaking, his skepticism shattering. Who the hell are you? He demanded, his voice rough, fear overtaking his usual edge. He glanced at me, wide-eyed, like I'd conjured her from the dark, but I was just as lost, my heart racing. I am the guardian of these woods, she said, stepping closer, her robes brushing the feathers, her presence a weight that pressed against us. And you, Ethan, have a role in the reckoning that's coming. Her words sank in, heavy and cold, a truth I couldn't dodge. Mia moved beside me, her shoulder brushing mine, her voice low. "What reckoning?" she asked, her tone firm despite the shake in her hands, her eyes flicking between the woman and me. "What's happening here? What's he got to do with it?" Her loyalty anchored me, a thread in the chaos. The Guardians. Gaze shifted, sweeping over us, her eyes glinting with a knowing light. "The forest remembers. Every scar, every loss," she said, her voice dropping, resonant with something ancient. "Ethan's past is tied to its fate, a thread woven long ago. The darkness stirs because he's here." The clouds roiled above. A deep rumble shaking the air, and the wind surged, whipping through the trees, carrying whispers, names, cries, a chorus of the lost. I felt it. A pull, a call, something waking up, and as I met her stare, I knew the forest wasn't done with me, and I couldn't turn back. The Guardian's words hung heavy, the wind howling around us, tugging at my jacket as the clouds churned, their spirals tightening like a noose overhead. My flashlight beam trembled, casting jagged shadows across her robes, her wild hair whipping in the gusts, her stone-sharp eyes locked on me, unblinking, pulling me into a truth I wasn't ready to face. "Ethan!" Mia's voice cut through, sharp and urgent, her hand gripping my arm, her red hair a blur in the wind. "What's she talking about, your past?" Her eyes searched mine, wide with worry, her breath fogging fast in the chill, a mix of fear and trust holding her steady. I shook my head, my throat tight, words tangling as memories clawed up. Summer evenings, fireflies flickering, my little brother's laugh echoing through the fields. I don't know," I stammered, my voice rough, my pulse hammering. "There's something from when I was a kid, maybe, but I don't—" My breath hitched, the past a shadow I couldn't grasp. Jake stepped forward, his flashlight, beam slicing the dark, his skepticism fraying at the edges. "This is nuts? Whoever you are, what's this reckoning?" he demanded, his voice cracking, his broad frame tense as he glared at the Guardian. "You can't just drop that and expect us to buy it." The Guardian's gaze shifted, slow and deliberate, landing on him like a weight. "The forest is alive," she said, her voice smooth, cutting through the wind's howl. "It holds every wound inflicted upon it, every death, every betrayal. Ethan's return has stirred what sleeps, and it will not rest until the balance is restored." A scream tore through the night, high, raw, shattering the tension, and I spun, my heart dropping as Mia stumbled back, her flashlight clattering to the ground, her face pale with horror. "There!" she shouted, pointing at the trees, her voice trembling, her fingers shaking as she tracked something moving fast. I snapped my beam toward the shadows, catching a glimpse. A figure, tall and warped, darting between the trunks, its edges blurred but familiar, too familiar. My stomach lurched, a cold sweat breaking out, those eyes, that shape. It was like looking at a ghost, a memory I'd buried deep, my brother lost years ago. "Ethan!" "What the hell is that?" Jake's voice shook, his bravado gone, his beam swinging wild as he backed up, his boots scuffing the dirt. "You see it too, right?" His eyes darted to me, wide and pleading, the rational guy crumbling under what we couldn't deny. "It's him!" I whispered, my voice fracturing, my legs locking as the figure paused, its white eyes glinting in the dark. My brother, or what was left of him. A shadow twisted by time and pain. I lost him, years back, a car wreck, my fault. Tears stung, hot and sudden, as the truth spilled out. The Guardian stepped closer, her robes brushing the feathers, her voice low, resonant. "He's not just a memory, Ethan. He's a part of this," she said, her eyes narrowing, glinting with a knowing light. "Your guilt woke him, tied him here. The forest holds what you've buried." Mia grabbed my arm, her grip fierce, pulling me back from the edge. "Ethan, stay with us," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the haze, her eyes wide with fear and resolve. "Whatever that is, we'll face it, but you've got to hold on." Her warmth anchored me, a lifeline I needed. The figure moved, slow, deliberate, its white eyes locked on me, and the wind surged, carrying whispers. "Ethan." "Why?" A voice I knew, warped and cold, slicing through me like a blade. My knees buckled, guilt crashing over me, a wave I couldn't outrun. "No!" I shouted, my voice raw, tearing out as I stepped forward, my flashlight shaking. "I didn't mean it. I didn't want you gone." Tears streamed, my chest heaving, and the figure paused, its gaze flickering, a crack in its shadow, as if my words hit something deep. The clouds rumbled, a deep groan shaking the earth, and the guardian's voice rose, steady and fierce. "Face him, Ethan, face what you've carried," she said, her hand pointing at the figure, her presence a wall against the dark. "The reckoning begins with you. Choose now, or it takes you all." The figure loomed, its white eyes piercing through the dark, and the wind howled, a storm of whispers. "Ethan." Why? Swirling around me like a cage. My flashlight beam trembled, casting its warped shape across the trees, my brother's shadow twisted by years of guilt, staring me down with a weight I couldn't bear. "Ethan!" Mia's shout broke through, her voice sharp, desperate, her hand clamping onto my arm, yanking me back from the edge. "Don't let it pull you in! Stay with us!" Her red hair whipped wild in the wind, her eyes wide with fear, but her grip was iron, a lifeline I clung to. Jake stumbled closer, his flashlight beam swinging erratic, his breath fogging fast. "What the hell is this, Ethan?" he yelled, his voice cracking, his skepticism shattered as he stared at the figure. How's that even possible?" His hands shook, the rational guy lost in the dark. The guardian stepped forward, her robes flowing like ink, her voice cutting through the chaos. "It's your past, Ethan, your pain given form," she said, her stone-sharp eyes glinting, unyielding. "The forest holds it, feeds it, face it, or it consumes you." Her words sank in cold and heavy, a truth I couldn't dodge. I sucked in a breath, the air thick with damp and decay, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I didn't mean it," I said, my voice raw, trembling as I faced him, my brother, or what he'd become. "I didn't want you to die. I was driving. I messed up." Tears streamed, hot and fast, spilling years of buried shame. The figure tilted its head, its white eyes flickering, a crack in its shadow as my words hit, anger, sorrow, something shifting. "You left me," it whispered, its voice a warped echo, cutting deeper than the wind, and I staggered, guilt crashing over me like a wave. "No, I didn't leave you," I shouted, my voice tearing out, raw with grief and rage. "I've carried you every damn day. I'm sorry." My chest heaved, my hands shaking as I stepped closer, the flashlight beam trembling, the forest holding its breath around us. Mia's grip tightened, her voice fierce. "Ethan, you've got this. Don't let it win," she said, her eyes burning. With resolve, her hand steady on my arm despite the fear creasing her face. "We're here. Face it with us." Her strength bolstered me, a spark against the dark. Jake edged forward, his beam locked on the figure, his voice low, shaken. "If this is real, if that's him." "Do what she says, man," he said, his usual doubt gone, replaced by a raw edge of belief. "We've got your back, don't let it take you." His words shook me, a bridge over the gap I'd felt. The guardian's voice rose, steady and commanding. "Acknowledge it, Ethan. Release it," she said, her hand pointing it. The figure, her presence a wall against the storm. "Your guilt binds him. Break it, or it binds you too." Her eyes glinted, urging me on, a guide in the chaos. The figure lunged, slow, deliberate, its shadow stretching, and I stepped into it, my heart pounding, my voice raw. "I'm sorry, I love you, I'll never forget," I said, tears streaming, my words a flood breaking loose. And the figure paused, its white eyes softening, a flicker of recognition cutting through. A blinding light erupted, surging from the shadow, swallowing the clearing in a glow that burned my eyes. I felt it, warmth, grief, love, rushing through me, a tide of memories mingling with the pain, and I screamed, raw and primal, letting it all go, the guilt, the fear crashing out of me. The light pulsed, the forest trembling, and the figure wavered, its shape softening. My brother's face, calm now, a faint smile breaking through. "Ethan," it whispered, fading into the glow, and I sank to my knees. gasping, the weight lifting, leaving scars I could feel but not see. The clearing stilled, the light fading, the wind dropping to a murmur, and I looked up. Mia and Jake. Beside me, their faces pale but steady, the guardian watching, her eyes glinting with a quiet knowing. "You've begun," she said, her voice low, "but the forest holds more. Your fight's not over." The clearing glowed faint in the aftermath, the last traces of light sinking into the earth, and the forest breathed around us, its hum soft but alive, a pulse I couldn't shake. Mia knelt beside me, her hand on my shoulder, her red hair damp with sweat, her green eyes wide with relief and lingering fear. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft, rough from the night strain, her fingers trembling as they brushed my arm. I nodded, slow, my throat tight, my chest aching where the weight had lifted. My brother's face still burned in my mind, softer now, a wound starting to heal. Jake stood a step back, his flashlight beam steady now, his broad frame slumped with exhaustion. "That was real," he said, his voice low, his skepticism gone, replaced by a raw awe that mirrored mine. "You faced it, man. I don't know how, but you did." His eyes met mine, a quiet respect breaking through. The guardian lingered, her robe still against the wind, her stone-sharp eyes glinting in the dimness. "You've freed him," she said, her voice resonant, cutting through the quiet. "But the forest holds more. Your past is a thread in its weave, Ethan, and it's not done unraveling." Her words sank in, heavy with promise and dread. Hauled myself up, my legs shaky, my hands scarred with faint glowing lines, marks of the fight, the release. "What's left?" I asked, my voice hoarse, wiping my face with a trembling sleeve. "If he's gone, what else is out there?" My heart thudded, a mix of relief and new fear. She pointed deeper into the woods, her hand steady, her gaze piercing. "The heart of the forest, your family's legacy lies there," she said, her voice low, urgent. "The darkness you woke is older than you, tied to this land. Seek it, or it seeks you." Her words chilled me, a call I couldn't ignore. Mia stood, her jaw tight, her flashlight beam cutting the dark. "We're not stopping," she said, her voice firm despite the shake in her hands, her eyes locking on mine. "Whatever's next, we're with you, right, Jake?" Her resolve bolstered me, a fire against the cold. Jake nodded, slow, his skepticism buried under what we'd seen. "Yeah, if it's real, we face it," he said, his voice rough but steady, his beam joining hers. "I'm not walking away, not after that." His words bridged the gap, a pact sealed in the night. The trees loomed, their branches swaying slow, whispering secrets I couldn't decipher, and I felt it, a pull, a thread tugging me deeper. "We've got to find it," I said, my voice low, firm, resolve hardening inside me. "Whatever's out there, I'm not running anymore." The guardian's lips twitched, a faint smile, tired but real. "Follow your heart, Ethan. The answers are there," she said, her voice dropping, resonant with something ancient. "But beware, the forest tests those who seek its truth." Her eyes glinted, a warning and a guide. The clearing was still, the feathers scattered and dim, but the air buzzed, alive with what we'd stirred. "We'll go together," I said, my voice steady despite the ache, a promise to them, to myself. "No matter what it throws at us." My chest tightened, grit locking in. Mia's hand brushed mine, light but firm. "We've got your back, always," she said, her eyes fierce, her resolve a rock I leaned on. Jake nodded, his beam steady, a silent vow. 3 of us against the dark, bound by what we'd faced. The forest stretched out, endless and alive, its hum a whisper of what waited, something older, deeper, tied to me, to my brother, to a past I'd only begun to see. "Let's move," I said, my voice firm, hauling my pack up, the weight grounding me against the pull ahead. Here's the end of my story, the one I sent in, everything that went down that night in Umpqua. Hope it hit you like it hit me, heavy and real. If it did, leave a like, subscribe if you can, comment something. Telling this wasn't easy. digging up scars I'd kept buried deep. I stepped out of my cabin that morning, expecting the Hards Forest to greet me with its usual chorus, the soft rustle of leaves, the chatter of birds high in the pines, the wind's gentle hum through the branches. Instead, silence hit me like a wall, thick and suffocating, pressing against my ears until they rang with the absence of sound. My boots crunched on the gravel path louder than they should have been, and my pulse kicked up, fast and unsteady. I wandered down the trail, eyes darting, heart sinking under a dread I couldn't shake. That's when I saw them, trees with trunks split open, fresh cracks jagged and raw, like something had burst out from inside overnight, oozing a quiet that bled into everything. I'm Lucio, 36, a forest ranger who traded Berlin's noise for this stretch of woods in Germany years back. Used to be a sound engineer, chasing perfect mixes in studios thick with cables and chaos, but I burned out, needed the peace I thought I'd find here. The forest always felt alive to me, every chirp and breeze weaving a comfort I could lean into. But now, that peace was gone, shredded by this creeping hush, and it was unraveling me, thread by thread. Each day, those cracked trees crept closer to my cabin, like a noose tightening, slow around my neck. The deeper I walked, the worse it got. That silence wasn't just empty, it was heavy, alive, wrapping around me like damp fog. I'd spent years tuning my ears to this place, picking up the faintest squirrel skitter or distant owl hoot, but now it was all gone, swallowed up. My breath puffed out in quick bursts, misting in the cool air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was stalking me, hiding just behind the shadows of those tall, dark pines, waiting for me to slip. Those trees weren't just quiet. They were wounded, their bark peeling back in sharp, splintered gashes, like they'd tried to scream and couldn't. I ran my fingers over one, rough wood biting my skin, and swore I felt a faint tremble, a ghost of sound trapped inside. This wasn't some freak storm or rot. It was deliberate, vicious. The forest I'd loved felt like it was turning on me, and every step I took screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't listen, stuck by a pull I couldn't name. Back in Berlin, I'd laughed off the old stories, my grandma's tales of forest spirits, guardians gone bad, curses that ate the world quiet. Vernigerode locals whispered about it too, a silence that swallowed sound itself. But I'd rolled my eyes, chalked it up to small-town spook talk. Now, standing here, those stories didn't feel so dumb. Each cracked trunk was a mark, a sign something old and mean was waking up, and I was smack in the middle of its hunting ground. My past started clawing up, raw and uninvited. My little brother Tomas, gone when we were kids, lost in a stupid accident I couldn't stop. His laugh used to fill our house, bright and wild, till it was just me and the quiet after. I'd come here to bury that guilt, let the forest's noise patch over the holes he left. But now this hush was digging it all back up, threatening to mute me too, and I couldn't tell if it was my head playing tricks or something real reaching out. The days piled on, and that silence grew teeth, sharp, hungry, gnawing at everything I'd built here. Those cracks spread closer every morning, and I started seeing it. This wasn't just nothing. It was something, a living thing, feeding on the forest's voice, getting stronger, bolder. I had to do something, figure out how to bring the sound back, but what? What happens if I can't? Night rolled in heavy, and that's when it all flipped. Something weird, something I couldn't dodge. Darkness dropped fast, and that silence thickened, wrapping me up like a wet shroud, choking out even the air's faint hum. I stood on the porch, lantern flickering in my hand, when I heard it. A whisper, so soft I thought I'd imagined it, drifting up from the woods. My heart slammed against my ribs, loud in the quiet, and I strained to catch it. Voices overlapping, pleading, pulling me like a thread tugging at my gut. Moonlight cut through the canopy, throwing pale, ghostly shadows across the trail, and I froze, torn between bolting back inside and chasing that sound. I'd come here for peace, not this, but my feet moved anyway, slow, cautious, drawn by a mix of fear and need. The whispers sharpened, calling me deeper into the brush, and I went, lantern swinging, light bouncing off the pines like it was scared too. I stumbled into a clearing, stark, beautiful, terrifying, bark shards scattered over the dirt like broken bones, leftovers from trees that had lost their fight. In the middle stood this massive oak, old as hell, its trunk split wide, gnarled and ugly like a lightning strike had gutted it. The whispers hit me all at once, loud now, a single voice crying out, "Help us!" And I sucked in a breath, cold air burning my lungs. A shadow moved, and she stepped out. A woman, wild-haired, eyes green and sharp like the forest itself, her clothes blending into the leaves like she'd grown out of the ground. "You hear them, don't you?" she said, voice low, urgent, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "You've got to help before it's too late." "Who are you?" I stammered, stepping back, mind spinning fast. "What's going on?" My hands shook, lantern light jittering over her face, catching those eyes that pinned me where I stood. "I'm Arya," she said, moving closer, moonlight painting her sharp and real. "Been fighting this thing, but the silence, it's eating. Everything, not just trees, but the forest's soul. It's feeding on fear, on pain. It's why you're here, isn't it?" Her words landed heavy, digging into places I'd locked up tight. I swallowed hard, chest tight. Thought I was running from noise, my past, not this. My voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded, how it laid me bare in front of her. "Your past dragged you here," she said, eyes steady, unflinching. "You carry loss. It's fuel for this thing. If you want to save the forest, you've got to face what's eating you." Her words hit like a punch, pulling up Tomas, the guilt. All of it, and I felt it. Raw, open, bleeding out. "What do I do?" I asked, desperation spilling out loud in the quiet. She leaned in, fierce. "Wake the voices in the trees, an old ritual to balance it. We need others who hear the whispers, who get sound and life. But first, you face your own silence." Baubigiksham. Ground shivered under us, a low growl I felt more than heard, and I flinched. Time was slipping fast. "Others?" I said, voice shaky. "Where do I even find them?" Doubt chewed at me. Did they exist? Or was this just me grasping at nothing? "We'll find them," she said, fire sparking in her eyes. "But you start with you break. You're quiet, or we've got no shot." The whispers surged, a mess of despair drowning my head, and the trees leaned in, cracked trunks glinting like they were begging me to pick a side. I sucked in a breath, shaky but sure. "Okay, I'm in. Where do we begin?" Arya's lips twitched, a spark of hope lighting her face. "We hunt for the others. Together we've got a chance to face this thing." We turned into the dark, whispers guiding us, steps heavy with what was coming. This wasn't just about the forest. It was me, Tomas, everything I'd lost, all tied up in a fight I didn't know I'd signed up for. That silence wasn't done. It was hungry, and I had to be ready. The woods got darker as we pushed on, air thick with a buzz I couldn't shake, like static gone sour. Shadows flicked at the corners of my eyes, quick and slippery, and the whispers turned sharp, mean almost, digging into me. Every step felt like wading through mud, the forest closing in, watching, waiting for me to crack. "Keep tight," Arya said, voice low, clipped, like she felt it too. "We're close to something big, where the dark's thickest." Her words hung heavy, and I nodded, but my head was spinning. "Big? How? Dark what?" Tomas's laugh echoed in my skull, bright then gone, and I wondered if I'd dragged myself here or been pulled. That guilt, it hit hard, heavy as ever, pulling up the day I lost him. Smoke, screams, my hands frozen while he called my name. I'd told myself I couldn't have stopped it, but now? Doubt gnawed at me, sharp and cold. Had I run here to hide, or had something known I'd come, waiting to use that pain against me? A light flashed ahead, faint, darting between the trees, and I froze. "Arya, hold up!" But my legs were already moving, chasing it like it had hooked me. "Don't!" she yelled, sharp, but I was gone, stumbling into a clearing where the air went tight, whispers slamming into me, loud and wild. I grabbed my head, staggering as they roared, "Help us, remember!" And there he was, Tomas, his face twisting into something awful, eyes burning with hurt. "You left me," he screamed, voice cutting deep, loud in the quiet. "You walked away when I needed you." "No!" I yelled, tears hot on my face. "I didn't mean to. I couldn't." My voice broke, weak against the truth, ripping me open. Had I let him down? Or was this the forest twisting it, making it worse? "Lucio, it's you." Arya's voice sliced through, steady but urgent. "Your pain's tied here. It's feeding this thing. Face it, or it wins." She stepped up, close, her eyes soft but fierce, and I felt it. "Tomas, this place, all knotted up together. What's that mean?" I rasped, throat raw. "He didn't just die. He's here," she said, quiet, heavy. "You've buried it, but it's real. His lost this forest. It's all one. Face it, and we've got a shot." Her words landed like stones, sinking deep, and the ground tilted under me. Panic clawed up my throat. If Tomas was here, what else was hiding? "Arya, I don't know if I'm strong enough," I choked out, voice trembling, hands shaking bad. She grabbed my arm, hard. "You are. We've got no choice. Free him, free the forest. Together." The shadows lunged, tendrils snaking out, cold and greedy. "You're mine," they hissed, pulling hard, and I stumbled, whispers drowning me out. "Fight!" Arya yelled, eyes blazing. "Hold on to what mattered. Him, you, the good stuff." I sucked in air, ragged, digging for it, Tomas laughing, us running wild, the love we had. "I won't let you have me," I roared, shoving back, with everything, light flaring hot in my chest, pushing against that dark grip. Another shape stepped out, an old woman, robes tattered, face shadowed, voice dripping venom. "You think you can stop this?" she snarled, eyes glinting mean. The shadows surged again, but I stood tall, not afraid of you, and threw my arms wide, ready for whatever she'd bring. This wasn't just me anymore. It was Tomas. The forest, every voice caught in this mess. I'd break it or go down swinging, and as that old hag glared, I knew this was it, the fight to end it, or lose everything I'd ever cared about. I stood there, chest heaving, shadows clawing at me like a swarm, but I didn't budge. That old woman's laugh cut through, sharp and nasty. "You're nothing, boy." Her eyes cold as ice, daring me to break. I felt it all. Tomas, the guilt, the forest, pressing down, but I dug deep, pulling up every shred of fight I had left. "Love's stronger than you," I yelled, voice raw, picturing Tomas, his grin, his dumb jokes, the way he'd hug me tight. Light burst out, hot and bright, slamming into the dark, and the shadow screeched, peeling back fast. She shrieked too, her shape cracking, dissolving into smoke as the tendrils ran. It stretched forever, that push, but then, snap, the light won, flooding the grove, quieting the chaos. I dropped, knees hitting dirt, sucking air like I'd been underwater too long. The dark was gone, mostly, and the trees stood still, hushed but alive again, whispers fading soft. "Tomas?" I croaked, scanning the clearing, desperate for him. Light dimmed, and there he was. Faint, realer now, eyes soft, a sad little smile. "You did it, Lucio," he said, voice quiet. "Sorry's not enough, I'm free now, but you'll carry this." He faded slow, and I choked up. Peace, yeah, but lost too, sharp and final. Arya came up, hand on my shoulder, her face torn between relief and worry. "You beat it, but it's not all gone. It'll wait, watch for another crack." Her voice was steady, but I saw the weight in her eyes. We'd won something, not everything. I nodded, feeling it. The quiet wasn't dead, just pushed back. "Still out there," I rasped, throat sore. My hands ached, marked from the fight, scars I'd wear forever, proof I'd faced it, proof it had cost me. But there was strength too, new, hard-earned. "We've got to go," she said, soft but firm. "This isn't over, more to dig up." I could feel it, the forest humming. Alive, not done with us. I stood, legs shaky, and caught a flicker. Shadows, shifting just out of sight, a promise they'd be back. The woods stretched out, dark and deep, whispering secrets I hadn't touched yet. Tomas was free, but what else was caught here? What had we stirred up? Arya's eyes met mine, steady. We were in this, for better or worse, chasing a truth bigger than us. That's my story. Everything I faced out there in the hearts. Hope it means something to you. If it does, leave a like, subscribe, maybe say what you think. Wasn't easy spilling this, tearing open those old wounds, but it's out now, and I'm glad you heard it through. What if the very laws of nature began to unravel right in front of you? That overcast afternoon I stood frozen, a chill creeping up my spine as I stared at the waterfall in Yosemite National Park. I'm Nathan, a 33-year-old ranger here, and this is my story. Scary Horror Stories, Park Ranger Edition. The water didn't just flow, it defied gravity, surging upward in twisting rivulets, spiraling back toward the rocks like a taunting rebellion against everything I knew, my heart. Pounded, not just from the breathtaking sight, but from a primal dread coiling tight in my gut. The air was thick with a gray haze, the sun long buried behind clouds, yet shadows danced at the edges of my vision, long, dark fingers stretching across the mossy ground, reaching for me with a hunger I couldn't explain. I've spent years in these woods, surrounded by towering pines and the roar of cascades. I've climbed 100 times. Each ascent was a ritual, each breath of crisp mountain air, a tether to something bigger. Nature's steady pulse, a comfort I could rely on. But lately, that pulse faltered. The waterfalls, once a soothing hymn of serenity, twisted into something eerie, their currents bending in ways that mocked reason. Shadows crept where they shouldn't, even under bright noon skies, slithering across the forest floor like ink spilled from some unseen hand. I'd tried to document it, my camera slung over my shoulder, snapping shot after shot of those unnatural shapes. But every photo came out warped, blurred, as if the shadows were erasing themselves, refusing to be caught, leaving me with nothing but distorted ghosts on film. It started small, just a flicker here, a whisper there. But that day, I felt the shift hit hard. The shadows weren't just tricks of light anymore. They coiled around tree trunks, weaving into the bark like threads in a dark tapestry, alive and watchful. I could hear it in the leaves, a rustling that wasn't just wind, but whispers, faint and fleeting, carrying secrets I couldn't grasp. I'd always been a skeptic, rooted in the solid ground of facts, but now I was clawing at a reality splintering like brittle glass. Yosemite's cliffs and meadows, once my sanctuary, felt like a stage now, a backdrop for something vast and unknowable. The trees loomed taller, their gnarled branches clawing at the gray sky like skeletal hands, no longer allies but silent sentinels of a growing menace. I remembered my childhood here, racing through these woods, laughing under the pines, safe in their embrace. Those days felt distant now, tainted by a dread that seeped into every memory, turning comfort into confinement. Deeper I went, chasing the waterfall's strange song, the air growing heavy with a buzzing energy I couldn't name. It was like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to step over some invisible line. The shadows thickened, merging into a presence I could feel, alive, pulsing, its motives hidden in the churn of the water. I had to understand it, to fix whatever was breaking the natural order I'd sworn to protect. Every instinct screamed, "Run, get out, save yourself," but my feet stayed planted, drawn to the mystery like a moth to flame. The forest wasn't just a place anymore. It was a trap, and I was caught, staring into an abyss I couldn't fathom. I gripped my camera tighter, its weight a flimsy shield against the unknown. Night was falling, and with it came a promise. Something was about to happen, something I couldn't unsee or undo. Darkness rolled in, and that's when it hit. Something so wild and inexplicable it turned my world inside out, pulling me deeper, into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Night-cloaked Yosemite, and a shiver crawled up my spine, urging me to bolt, but I pressed on, drawn deeper into the shadows. The whispers sharpened, a tangle of voices weaving through the rustling leaves, blurring the line between wind and words. My flashlight flickered, its beam stuttering as I stumbled into a clearing where moonlight barely pierced the canopy. My heart slammed against my ribs, breath fogging in the cold as I swept the light across the trees. "Dawn," I gasped. She stood there, a fellow ranger I'd trained with years back, her silhouette ghostly against the twisted pines. Her eyes were wide, glinting with fear and grit, her short blonde hair catching the faint glow. "Nathan," she called, voice quaking but sharp, "you've got to help me." Her hands clenched tight, knuckles white, as if anchoring herself. Against the dark, I rushed over, mind spinning. "What's happening? You look like hell. What's out here?" My voice cracked, betraying the unease clawing at me. "It's not just ghosts," she said, eyes darting to the trees like something might lunge out. "I've been tracking this. It's worse than I thought. The shadows aren't shadows. They're alive, feeding off the mess in the environment." "Feeding?" "Shia," I echoed, disbelief warring with the dread in my gut. "You're saying they're... what, eating this chaos?" My skepticism buckled under her haunted stare. She took a shaky breath, hands trembling, the waterfall flowing backward. "It's a symptom. Nature's fighting something, an unseen force, animals acting wild, plants dying overnight. It's all tied together." "What do we do?" I asked, voice dropping to a whisper, the weight of her words sinking in like cold stone. I could see her fear mirrored in my own tightening chest. "We find the source," she said, resolve cutting through her panic. "There's a legend, a forest spirit, a guardian of balance. If it's upset, everything unravels. We need the Heartstone before it's too late." "Heartstone?" I frowned, a flicker of campfire tales sparking in my mind, old stories I'd dismissed as kid stuff. "Where is it? How do we even—" She pointed down a trail snaking deeper into the woods. "I've got a map, bits from the archives. It's hidden, but we're running out of time. The shadows will take it all if we don't move." I wanted to run, every nerve screamed it. But Dawn's eyes held me. We were rangers, sworn to this land. I couldn't ditch her or the fight. "Okay," I said, steadying myself. "Let's go." A growl rumbled through the trees as we started off, low and guttural. Then it stepped out, a bear, massive and wrong, its body warped, eyes glowing faint. The shadows pulsed around us, alive, tracking us, and I knew we were in deeper than I'd ever feared. We bolted, the bear's roar shaking the ground, but Dawn yanked me back. "Back!" Her voice sharp as its claws swiped, grazing the air. Where I'd been, my heart raced, adrenaline surging, fear threatening to drown me in this unraveling nightmare. The air crackled as we ran, a jolt that prickled my skin. I glanced at Dawn, her face a mask of grit and terror. "What's happening?" I panted, lungs burning, legs pumping through the underbrush. "We can't stop," she yelled, voice ragged. Just then the earth quaked and I stumbled, nearly crashing down. The shadows twisted, thickening into a swirling vortex ahead, alive with flickering shapes. "Dawn!" I shouted, pulling her to a halt. "Look at that!" Images flashed in the dark. Faces, places, moments I knew, my past spilling out like blood from a wound. "It's us," I stammered, heart hammering as I saw them. Friends lost on duty, their eyes pleading. They're mine, people I couldn't save." Her eyes widened, fear flashing. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice tight, as if she dreaded the answer. "I thought I'd let them go," I said, voice breaking. "But they're still here, haunting me. I was supposed to protect them, and I failed." Guilt surged, raw and heavy, dragging me back to those dark days. "Snap out of it, Nathan!" Dawn's shout sliced through, sharp and desperate. "We've got to focus, now!" The bear loomed closer, twisting, its face morphed into Jason, my old partner, his eyes hollow with pain. "No!" I yelled, reeling as the shadow screamed, a chorus of my failures clawing at my mind. It's not real. Dawn grabbed my arm, yanking me back. The darkness is messing with you. We've got to move. I shook my head, fighting the tide. It feels real. They're real. The forest is throwing my past at me. My voice cracked, panic rising, like bile. The vortex swelled, more faces. Dawn's now, her family tangled with mine. They're here too, I gasped, realization hitting hard. It's not just me, it's us. It's feeding on us, our regrets, she said, eyes flashing with grim understanding. We've got to face it together, then let's break it. I roared, grabbing her hand. Energy sparked between us, a lifeline in the chaos, and I felt defiance flare, pushing back the dark. The bear snarled, its warped voice a mix of rage and sorrow. You can't escape. But I stood firm, Dawn beside me, ready to fight the shadows of our pasts, knowing this was just the start. We surged into the vortex, light blinding as it swallowed us. I gripped Dawn's hand, a lifeline in the storm, the bear's roar fading to a hollow echo. I hit. The ground hard, air rushing back into my lungs, the silence ringing in my ears. Dawn sat up beside me, her face etched with exhaustion but lit with a faint triumph. We made it, she whispered, a fragile smile breaking through. But the forest held its breath, tension simmering beneath the calm. Did we? I muttered, brushing dirt off, Jason's face still burning in my mind. A weight lighter now, but not gone. The trees stood straighter, scars lingering from our fight. I scanned the clearing. Something lingered, a whisper in the leaves, a warning of more to come. Jason's still out there, I said, dread knotting my gut. Dawn's eyes softened, heavy with loss. We faced it together. He's not gone, just part of us now. We carry them, Nathan. Always will.